Comrade Harris shocks America with economic plan. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has been accused of repeating the mistakes of the Soviet Union. If she wins the presidential election, the U.S. will face mass starvation, claims Elon Musk. Comrade Kamala wants to introduce socialist price controls, which will lead to empty store shelves in the U.S., her rival Donald Trump criticized. So, what exactly did Harris propose in her economic plan that was so shocking? Vice President Kamala Harris's economic plan, which she intends to implement if she wins the election, has been harshly criticized by Elon Musk and Donald Trump. She announced her intention to introduce the first-ever federal ban on price gouging for food in the face of high inflation. Additionally, she plans to provide $25,000 to Americans purchasing a home for the first time. If Kamala Harris wins the presidential election, the U.S. will face mass starvation, according to Elon Musk. On his social media page, he shared an analysis by a financial expert who reviewed the Democratic candidate's program. The analyst predicted widespread hunger and the collapse of the U.S. economy. Spot-on conclusion, Musk agreed. Donald Trump also criticized Harris for her idea of price regulation, comparing it to the planned economy of the USSR. Trump dubbed Harris Comrade Kamala and a communist. Comrade Kamala announced she wants to implement socialist price controls. Did you see that? It's never worked before. They tried this plan there, and what happened to the Soviet Union? Trump asked. Overall, Harris's economic plan reflects a typical set of measures from a Democratic Party representative aimed at increasing the role of the government in the economy, notes Yegor Toropov, an American studies expert and researcher at the Higher School of Economics. However, Harris goes beyond her party's idea that the government should intervene in free market processes by helping certain groups or industries. Subsidizing housing with $25,000 for first-time buyers will inevitably lead to further increases in real estate prices, which would have naturally declined in a free market given the decreasing affordability for citizens, Toropov notes. But the most striking and controversial part of Kamala Harris's proposals is, of course, the regulatory measures aimed at preventing excessive prices on everyday goods and excessive corporate profits. This has never historically led to long-term positive effects for either producers or consumers. Donald Trump, who aims to become the 47th President of the United States instead of Kamala Harris, along with several mainstream economists, has rightly criticized Harris's ideas. This is the first real opportunity for Trump to criticize Harris from a centrist and market-oriented perspective. Over the past month, her popularity has steadily risen, while Trump has been losing ground in the polls, resorting to desperate, unpopular, and electorally futile personal attacks against her instead of rational criticism of the negative consequences of her ideas to increase the role of the government in the economy, says Toropov. So, what's wrong with government price regulation? Inflation is always present in the economy. The difference is that open inflation is characteristic of a market economy, while hidden inflation is typical of a command or planned economy, where it manifests as artificially created shortages due to strict government price controls. This was evident in the economy of Venezuela. When prices for certain goods are artificially suppressed, it leads to reduced production, resulting in shortages and long lines. This was exactly what could be observed in the Soviet Union during the 1980s, notes Ekaterina Novikova, Associate Professor at the Department of Economic Theory at Plekhanov Russian University of Economics. Venezuela relied heavily on oil exports, so when oil prices plummeted, revenues dropped sharply, leading to a decline in living standards and strikes. The U.S. exacerbated the situation by imposing sanctions, which eventually stripped Venezuela of any export income. Inflation skyrocketed, prompting the authorities to artificially curb price increases. As a result, the country faced real hunger, people lost their jobs, and many emigrated. According to the IMF, in 2018, Venezuela's inflation rate reached an astronomical 1,370,000%, over 1,000,000%. People were in dire need of humanitarian aid, medicines and food. The government was forced to lift the ban on dollar transactions and cease controlling prices on goods. As a result, inflation decreased to less than 3,000% in 2019, 686% in 2021, and under 190% in 2023. Thus, if the US were to implement price controls, it would initially lead to product shortages, followed by even greater price increases and further economic imbalances, agrees the expert. The historical example of the USSR is also illustrative in this regard. In the USSR, there was a planned economy, state-run trade, and centrally set prices. In such a model, the economic mechanism that balances supply and demand didn't function, resulting in chronic shortages of the most sought-after goods in stores and the emergence of a black market, reminds Olga Belenkaya, head of macroeconomic analysis at Finam Group. In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union experienced widespread shortages, with empty store shelves and a lack of essential goods. This didn't happen because production suddenly collapsed. In fact, statistics show an increase in industrial production and the output of mass-produced goods during that period. The issue was that, for instance, toothpaste in the USSR cost 1 ruble, while in France it was 15 francs, so it was being sold there instead. Before 1987, this was impossible, even with price controls in place, due to the state's foreign trade monopoly. However, in 1987, the monopoly was abolished, and cooperatives were allowed. Consequently, goods from the USSR started flowing abroad. At the same time, imported goods began entering the USSR, but they were sold at prices too high for many citizens. It's not surprising that some Americans were shocked by Harris's proposal. However, there isn't enough clarity on what exactly lies behind her slogan of the first-ever federal ban on price gouging. Moreover, not all campaign promises end up being implemented. It's quite possible that Harris didn't intend to introduce comprehensive price controls on food, akin to those in the USSR, says Belenkaya. Elements of price regulation for certain types of goods are occasionally used in many countries, including in recent Russian history, The Economist notes. This disrupts the normal functioning of the market. The leadership of the Central Bank of Russia has often stated that administrative price regulation methods, if applied, should only be for a short period. Otherwise, they lead to disincentivizing increased supply of regulated goods and can cause shortages. As an alternative, the Central Bank and the Ministry of Economic Development have proposed targeted cash payments to low-income individuals. Such subsidies for low-income families are widely used in the US and the EU, especially during periods of price shocks, Belenkaya notes. Export quotas or bans, such as those currently in place for gasoline, are also forms of government price regulation, though they are more flexible than direct price controls. However, such measures can also be unsafe if used on a permanent basis. In times of price shocks, regulation is sometimes unavoidable. But these measures also come at a cost to the economy. For example, restrictions on the export of certain products can increase supply in the domestic market but may undermine the country's exporters' positions in the global market, which have been built up over decades. Producers may lose interest in manufacturing products that are unprofitable for them, Belenkaya says. Experts believe that Harris's plan is largely populist. Especially since measures to curb the rise in food and energy prices were more relevant during the cost of living crisis of 2021 to 2022. However, this issue isn't as pressing now. According to BLS data from July 2024, food prices in the U.S. have risen by an average of only 2.2% over the past 12 months, Belenkaya concludes.